Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this special episode recorded in Monterey, we will be learning from Erin, head of Cargill Ventures. Erin, welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to actually have this conversation in person, so thank you.
I think in person is so much better.
It is.
So first, Erin, maybe you could introduce yourself and maybe your journey into corporate venturing.
Sure. So my journey is a little bit different than most people that do this. I like to say that my career has taken some very hard right and left turns over the last 20 plus years. I actually started my career in the military. So I went to a military academy for college, and then after I graduated, I was an artillery officer in the U.S. Army for about 6 years, active duty. After my second deployment to Iraq, I decided to get out and go to the civilian side and jumped right into brand management at Kraft Foods, which was an interesting transition. But I spent the next decade or so working really on the operator side of running P&L businesses, doing a variety of roles, marketing, brand management, global innovation, strategy, M&A integration, in global CPG, food and beverage companies. And then after I went to graduate school, I transitioned a little bit happenstance into corporate ventures. SC Johnson was building a venture team, and so they reached out and said, hey, we want someone that has a marketing background but also has done some deal work. And my role at that time was a commercial integration lead for a couple of deals that we had made when I worked at McCain Foods. So I remember they sent me the job description and I said, is this a real job? This sounds amazing. And I had been aware of more of, I would call it like inorganic growth means when I was in grad school at University of Chicago. I took an M&A strategy course that I really loved and said, oh, how do I get into that with more of an operator type background? So I moved into corporate VC without having any really, I would say, investing background. So I know a lot of people that come into CVC come from venture capital firms or investment banking, so they have really strong deal experience. I didn't have that, but I had the operator experience. So I was at SC Johnson for a few years where I got great mentorship and learned a lot about deal making, deal structures, how to grow through venturing, and how to access this new route of innovation versus just doing everything internally, which I found really exciting. And so I was there for a few years, and then I led Tyson Ventures, which is the fund at Tyson Foods. And then Cargill called and said, hey, we're building this corporate venture capital function. Would you like to come do this here? And so I've been there for a little over 3 years now. So we've built the team out, built the portfolio, have a great ventures board. So I've really built the function at that organization for the last few years, and so that's where I am today.
I have so many double-click questions to ask, whether it's mentorship or your military background or the fact that you could start from scratch with all the best practices you learned. But let's start with your background.
Sure.
You have a military background. I think you went to West Point.
I did, yeah.
Maybe you can share about what it is that you've learned during that time that you are using today in corporate venturing.
That's a great question. I feel like what's so exciting about CVC is that it varies so much from organization to organization. It really depends on what the organization's goals are, what you're trying to deliver, and then the structure you can build to help deliver that. I'm the kind of person that really thrives in environments where there's not a lot of structure. I crave chaos to some extent and try to create order. So I would say that's a question I get all the time, like, wait, you have a bachelor's degree in law and nuclear engineering? Like, what are you doing here? Right? But I think the experiences that I got, especially in the military and especially in those combat deployments, where you're thrown into situations at really a moment's notice, and you have to trust your training, you have to trust your instincts, and you have to build a really great team around you. So despite the fact that you're an officer and people should listen to you, you still need to build great relationships. People need to know that they can trust you. They need to know that you're going to make the right decisions, especially in really stressful times. And I think the idea of accountability and knowing that you're going to have to be able to live with the consequences or answer for those choices that you make is something that I think in the business world is a little bit lacking at times. When I was 22 years old, I was a platoon leader. I had 40 men that I was responsible for on a day-to-day basis. That can be a very big responsibility, but then transitioning to being an individual contributor and finding your place can be a hard transition. But I think the perspective that it gives you in situations where people are panicking, saying, oh my gosh, we're not going to get this product to a customer in time, or our launch is delayed because this thing out of our control happened. I'm like, all right, take a breath, calm down. Like, we can figure it out. So I think having that perspective and the ability to zoom out and say, okay, what really are the consequences of this? No one's really going to get hurt here. You're going to sleep in your own bed tonight. I think being able to have like that perspective and that calmness that being in much more stressful situation provides has been very advantageous in my career.
There's so much to double click, but I love the part about trust, but I also like the part about training and processes and trusting what you've built together as a team. Mm-hmm. And venture capital is probably even more what you've described in corporations, mm-hmm. where a lot of people think there's a lot of luck. But actually, a lot is about training, doing the right things day after day. Can you talk a little bit about what you've discovered during venture capital?
Absolutely. So it's interesting at CVCs, I think that there's a much higher bar even for performance or the number of portfolio companies that actually deliver value versus a traditional VC. So I think up front, there's a lot more scrutiny put on what's the ultimate strategic value that we're trying to derive from this investment. Obviously, we have financial return targets. So when people say, are you strategic or financial? I'm like, strategic, but we have to deliver financial value as well. And part of that is the cash on cash return on the investment. But then when you stack the strategic value on that, was there incremental revenue? Is there new market access? Is there cost avoidance? Like, what are all those things that you're adding real value for your organization? And how do we do that is really critical to lay the groundwork for success. But execution, right, always has its challenges.
Yeah, very nice. Now, you also talked about mentorship. Can you talk about the value of mentorship and how it has helped you? I'm sure you're also a mentor of others, so can you talk a little bit about mentorship?
Yeah, I think mentorship is just so key, both formal and informal. I think there's a bit of a misconception when people are like, I have to have a mentor. So a lot of and I've seen this happen at many organizations where I've worked, they try to set up formal mentorship programs and match you. Sometimes it's not. It's more of like a tactical execution on a program that's been developed versus looking for things organically. And I personally have found more success from mentors that I found organically. So through networking, former bosses that I've had, leaders at organizations where I've worked that I've found something especially inspiring or interesting about how they do what they do. Mm-hmm. Building a relationship and getting to learn from those people versus saying, I'm going to sit down and talk to you about this problem I have and get your advice. It's more about building rapport, building the trust. And I think a lot of those, to me, most valuable mentorship experiences have and continue to happen through just building close relationships with people that I admire and that I want to some extent emulate as I continue my career. And then I like to do that for other people as well. I think you're a great example, right? You're an informal mentor to me. You probably don't know that, but
I don't know that.
I think the relationship that we've been able to build through GCV, the work that I've seen you do out in the community and the environment is a great example for how to build trust, how to build a community, how to get value out of what you're doing. And so I think everybody always needs to think about, one, what's the value that I can provide? So even in those relationships where you're being mentored, I always think about what is it, obviously, that I want from this person, but what can I offer them as well? What value can I bring to the table? Because I think really importantly in mentorship relationships, it can't always be a get for the person that's being mentored. I think it has to be a mutual give. What value am I bringing them? What perspective am I bringing them? I have quarterly meetings with my CEO. He was the original chair of the venture board in his previous role, running our protein and salt business. So he has become just a fantastic mentor to me, but it's grown organically. I still meet with him quarterly, and I always say, how can I help you? What is it that you want to learn from me that can be helpful in the role you have now? And he says, I'm not as close to maybe the external ecosystem or what innovation's happening out there. Like, what do you find exciting? What are the trends in venture capital right now? What do we need to be thinking about? And even those tiny little nuggets of information from the smaller investments we're making help inform his overall perspective of the market, the business. So I think just always keeping in mind like what the value is, not just that you're getting, but that you're bringing, is really important.
It's wonderful. I love it. Let's talk about something you just mentioned, which is community, especially GCV.
Sure.
We are here in Monterey when they have their annual event, which is a great place with 800 CVC meeting.
It's gotten so big now, right?
It's so big,
There's
right?
So many people here, yeah.
Can you talk about, especially for corporations who are listening in the audience, who may not understand the value of community for corporate VC, why does it matter to have this community?
So I can say why I think it matters. Obviously, I
Yes.
think everyone will have a different perspective, but at least for me, now that I've done various venturing roles at different organizations, I'm very aware of the fact that CVC looks different depending on where you are. So you have to think about, again, matching up what the organization's needs are, what you can deliver, what's your mandate, and then how you're executing against that. So a process or a format that might work for one organization, depending on what their mandate and goals are, may not be able to lift and shift to another organization. So the ability to have community where you can have conversations with people and say, hey, this is a problem I'm having, or this is how I structured this, but it's not delivering the results that I wanted. How do you think about this? How do you set metrics for performance for your fund? How do you staff? How do you think about succession planning? How do you communicate with your venture board? So honestly, just that information exchange, that knowledge exchange has been really valuable for me personally as I've tackled thinking about what the right structure and process is for each of the organizations where I've been. And then I think just the support you get from other people who are living this same life, so to speak. Like, oh, you just went through a CEO transition. How's that going? How have you handled that? How has it changed your structure? How are you living with that now? Oh, you have portfolio companies that are no longer strategically relevant. What's your plan with those? How are you managing that? So I think being able to share that on a professional level, and then I also think on a personal level, it's really important because someone's maybe, having a personal issue or their team's getting restructured. Just being able to reach out to people and say, hey, how are you doing, right? Or them to reach out and say, I'd really love to be able to talk to you about this. That support system, I think, is it's very important. So a lot of different things.
I agree. So worth coming to GCV Monterey.
I think so. I think the hardest thing here, though, is like we just said, it is so big now. The hardest part is deciding how you're going to spend your time to deliver the most value for you.
Yep.
And I think for me, it's about how do you prioritize the time with the people you want to continue to build relationships with.
I'm glad you're spending 1 hour with us today. So. But it's interesting what you said, which is most of the challenges are going to be the same over time. Yet no CVCs are alike. They all have tweaks, and whether small or big. Mm-hmm. And you've gone through in your journey 3 different steps of corporate venturing,
Sure.
which again, motherships being different. Can you talk about that transition from your first experience to your second experience to the third, where you actually shaped it the way I think you felt was leveraging all the best practices from the past?
Sure. You have to learn the organization and you have to know what the mandate is and then figure out a bit of the right structure to make that happen. I was really lucky when I came into SC Johnson, into that ventures group. It was still fairly new, but they had a very clear mandate of how they wanted to invest, the type of companies they were looking for. And that situation is actually very different than the other CVCs that I've been at. So it was specifically a pipeline for new opportunities to build new business units. So it's looking for, and it was like, hey, go find white space areas that we can become new businesses. So now they have the lifestyle business units that has companies like Baby Organics, Method, like really great lifestyle brands, like health and wellness focused brands. And the venture team has become a bit of a feeder for that, new brands to bring into that portfolio. So then when I moved to Tyson Ventures, there was actually a really great structure already set, a fundamental structure there. So I'm sure Reese Schroeder, he's a bit of a legend in corporate VC. He'd already laid some really great groundwork. So stepping into that and then just fine tuning it, like based on what the organization's needs were, but a very different mandate. And that was minority investments that could end up in acquisition or could just be enabling technology. So really looking at a variety of opportunities. And so then when I came to Cargill, there was a basis set. The team was actually built out of a strategy project that said, hey, we're missing a lot of opportunity that's out there to source external innovation because, and I think rather brilliantly and humbly, admitting we can't do this all ourselves. If we want to grow in a way that's going to deliver real value, we need to be open to that external ecosystem, and we need to build partnerships, build relationships, access technology that we don't have the capability or the core competency to build ourselves. But the education process that needs to happen, building a new function from scratch, it does take a lot of relationship building, trust building, planning, process implementation. It does take time, but you want to be thoughtful about what those processes are and what the organization is like able to digest, able to understand, and willing to take the risk on. Cargill's been able to become wildly successful over the last 150 years by being incredibly driven by those commodity focused and then adding on to that, right? So starting in grain and then adding protein ingredients that flow from the upstream commodity work that we need to learn how we can be an early adopter. That's uncomfortable.
So Erin, one thing you've mentioned is you have many business groups who have very different verticals. In one way, it's great because you have many more things you can look at, but at the same time, it's even more complex. How do you handle that?
It is a bit of a double-edged sword, but a company doesn't exist and be successful for 150 years without adapting and growing. And that's a constant process. You have to adapt to like changing consumer needs, to changing regulatory environment, to changing climate and environmental needs. There's just so many considerations. And we have the conversation quite often with our venture board that it's just as important what we say no to than what we say yes to, because we're making conscientious choices about where we want to go and what's going to deliver the most value over time. So we've been really thoughtful about creating a construct for portfolio design where we've said not just where do we want to grow, but overlaying with that, what's the external market look like? So there could be areas where we want to grow, but there's just not a ton of external innovation happening. VC tends to be a bellwether for where the market's going. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So if there's a high concentration of companies trying to startups trying to solve this problem and VC dollars flowing into, that's probably an area where we should look at sourcing that external innovation or do some technology landscaping to say, hey, this is really something that's of interest. So we overlay that with what our corporate priorities are. And then another layer that we look at is, because we have to deliver strategic value, my team can help facilitate that, but it's really the businesses that have to be resourced and prioritize themselves in order to deliver that. Because if we say we're going to make this investment, but there's no connection to the resources in the core business, whereas really I think the value in the partnership that we provide, then what's the value of doing an investment? What's the value of building a partnership when there's no resourcing to deliver it?
There's so much to unpack here. And first, I like the way you're talking about strategy. I like to think about strategy as not just deciding where to go, but what not to do.
Correct.
And the prioritization, you've given quite a few good ideas about it. But one thing that I want to double click is you made invest in something that's highly strategic, that could bring strategic value, but if there is no one in the mothership on the receiving end ready with the resources, you end up with actually a mismatch. How do you handle identification of the right strategic value at the right time? And how do you handle when there's a mismatch? Because it will still happen however well prepared you are.
Right. I think we're probably all living through that right now, just given what corporations are dealing with, given market conditions, really the lack of access to traditional VC dollars. I think it's no secret that there's been significantly less money raised by funds, traditional VC funds, or there were big investors that have literally just gotten out of VC.
Yep.
They've said, hedge funds that were dabbling in VC with really big checks have pulled out
or
entirely,
returning money.
Right? So thinking about one opportunity that could provide, but also the challenges that provides each of us has been something that we're unpacking right now. What we've done is had some very difficult conversations with our venture board about how we transition from this being less of a strategic delivery of value to a financial delivery. We did get strategic value out of it, and it was the learning that said, hey, this is a place you don't want to go.
Which is again strategic.
Exactly. So I think I'd be interested to understand, like, how do you attribute a value to learning? Like, there are a lot of differing views on the value of learning when it comes to corporate venturing. So I'm curious about how you think
it's
about
a timely question. So typically I don't take questions, but I will answer because last week we had our reflection week where everyone in TDK Ventures comes together and we look at the past 12 months, what we did well, what we could do better. And one of the things we have for the full team is the same set of team KPIs where we measure how much engagements, what we call equal win engagements, are happening between our corporation, TDK, and all the startups, whether we invested in or not. What we did not measure, which we plan to measure next year, is all the decisions for the corporations not to continue investing in a space from the learnings with engaging with startups. And that part, which I said earlier, strategy is about what you decide to do, but more importantly, what you decide not to do. We were not measuring that part. And that's what we plan to do in the next 12 months. So that's one of the improvements we're making at TDK Ventures.
Interesting. Yeah,
So,
that's helpful. We're, like I said, just a little past 3 years, so we're getting to this inflection point that when I came on board, I said, hey, we need 5 to 7 years in these investments to really prove out the value. But we're hitting the leading edge now of some of the earlier investments that were made, or some legacy investments that were made before, out of the businesses before I arrived, and said, okay, we learned something, but I would argue that there is always value, financial value to learning. And I think you have to be able to articulate that to leadership in a way that translates it at least to some financial metric. Because I will never forget, I had a CFO of a company that I've worked for look me right in the face and say, there's no value to learning. And I said, I actually disagree, because everything we're doing helps make a strategic decision that ultimately is in service of delivering value.
I would push back on the CFO, which is doing the wrong things, wasting money,
Exactly.
is bad financial value.
Right.
And if you learn about things you shouldn't do, you're saving a lot. It's just you can't measure that saving, but you can estimate still that saving. Very nice. Now I want to think about the entrepreneurs who are going to watch this interview. And that's going to be my last question to wrap up the interview.
Sure.
What it is you're excited to invest next?
Oh, there's so much. I think, again, right, that's the challenge. There's so many just amazing things happening out there. So I think enabling technologies is something that we're leaning into a bit more. So for me, those are technologies that actually stretch across enterprises. So it's not just, okay, this is relevant for the protein and salt enterprise. This is relevant for food and bio, or ag supply chain, or animal nutrition and health. what are some of the core enabling technologies that actually can stretch across multiple of those and become a platform that deliver value for the organization. So a great example of that is precision fermentation. But what does that mean? That means using fermentation in a way that delivers differentiated products or ingredients to our customers. So in the space of meat and dairy alternatives, in the space of starches and sweeteners and texturizers, in the space of animal nutrition, so from feed additives or feed, there's just so many things. And then it doesn't sound as exciting to people as I think that it is, but in automated manufacturing and smart supply chain, there are a lot of really interesting technologies that I think are going to help us stay relevant and become more efficient in the work that we do and be able to deliver on customer asks and expectations with respect to things like traceability from source to consumers' plates. But I think one of the big values that our group brings to the organization isn't just the investments that we make, but it's being connectors. So we do have visibility to priorities across the organization, but also key business leaders and strategy leaders that, hey, we might not make an investment in your company, but there could be a great partnership there. Make those introductions or get people to the right folks in the organization to have meaningful conversations about becoming partners on the commercial side.
There are many ways to add value.
Right.
Erin, thank you so much for your time today and being so candid and sharing your journey and all the best practices along the way.
Thank you so much, Nicholas.